independent journalist based in the UK, and this is our keynote from the US. Because the speaker we've brought in from the US actually spent a lot of his career in Europe. So he has a very big understanding of the international market. But he is going to talk to us about what's happening in the US market and what specifically is happening at Fox, and also his view on what's going on with how the consumer power has changed, let us say, or turned the dial on what we need to do as an industry to make sure we keep them attracted to our content, to our platforms, to our services. So I'm very pleased to introduce Brian Sullivan. He is President and COO of Fox Network's Digital Consumer Group. He's responsible for coordinating digital strategy and growth initiatives across the Fox portfolio of networks and products. He runs a 200-person team. He tells me that that's actually a small team compared to what he used to do over here in Europe, but it sounds like a pretty big team to me. They've done a lot of work in the last few years, and we're going to hear a lot about it. Before joining Fox in the US, Brian was CEO of Sky Deutschland. He led it through one of Europe's largest ever media turnarounds, with the service's customer base increasing over 70% during his tenure. Prior to being in Germany, Brian spent 14 years at BSkyB, Sky in the UK. He rose to managing director of Sky's customer group. Using a specific focus on customers and innovation, he helped launch the original Sky Digital service, as well as Sky Plus, Sky HD, Sky Broadband, and Sky Go. All these helped to drive business to over 10 million customers for Sky in the UK. So without, oh, and one other thing I'd like to say about him. He also is learning something called Kabaddi, which is a sport in India. If you haven't heard about it, you can Google it. Please welcome Brian Sullivan.
Hey, everyone. We should just take this whole thing to a cafe somewhere nearby, because about half of you I've worked with over the course of my career. It's a very strange audience to be looking out at, particularly the first row here. Inside joke. Yeah, exactly. So what Kate asked me to do was, number one, talk really short, because she accused me of not being able to do that. So this is a very simplistic presentation with a couple demonstrations of some things that are happening in the United States, so that we can then have a conversation and she can ask me a ton of questions that I will avoid answering. So, so we'll see if I can actually meet up to that objective. Really, this is, I wanted to start with just a very simple progression of time, something that everybody in this room will be aware of, but something that kind of has come back to light for me since I've moved back to the United States. And realize that what we're experiencing right now is natural in the industry. The disruption is something that has always been on the cards, because effectively we started with a model that the consumer had the power. That business model kind of got distorted over time, and things have now changed where it's brought the power back to the consumer, and we're all having to find a way of, as it says here, deal with it. So let's go back to the start of television in the United States. And apologies for this being all from the US perspective, but we can talk about how that applies to other markets around the world when we do the Q&A. So US television started with 3 networks, or 3 men and a horse, black and white, and it was a good model. It provided entertainment for consumers that they, before that, could only ever get in, in a cinema. And it met their expectations because they didn't have any expectations beforehand. So that model was very much structured around the consumer. We'll give them entertainment in their home for free, supported by advertising. That model then got expanded, and the pendulum started to swing a bit, which is what that awful graphic in the upper right-hand side is supposed to be showing. Cable started for a good reason. Cable started to provide more choice to be able to the customer, give them more viewing opportunities because there's just too many people in the world, and not everybody has the same taste. So it was a very, very good model that was being extended further and further. Then the model got deeper, more towards the consumer, but with more cost associated with it, where you could actually go ahead and you could start to watch on demand by watching, originally, for those of you old enough to remember, VHS tapes and then DVDs. And you could go and rent or buy a movie, or you could go ahead and rent or buy a TV series, originally just the current shows, but then eventually we started to unlock past seasons through libraries. That capability then was introduced back into the cable world. And in the cable world, we delivered on demand. But it was a pretty fractionalized experience. You might be able to get some episodes here, some episodes there, but it was never really complete. And during that time, the price kept going up and up and up for the consumer. Then we introduced PVRs. I probably should add a picture of Sky Plus here, but I put TiVo up here because they were the first. And consumers could actually control what they were recording, and they could create their own stacks of programs. Again, whether it was current seasons or past seasons that they would record off of syndicated programming. That then got subsumed, I told you I was going to go fast here. That then got subsumed into the cable market, where the cable boxes started delivering in PVR capabilities, and the consumer got more and more choice. But with that came more cost, because we were all charging, well, in some cases, some companies were, as much as $10 or $15 extra on top of your cable bill in order to be able to get this capability within your service. So that model kept getting more choice and more power to the consumer, but the price got more and more distorted. In the US, less than in Europe, the operators, the programmers, the content creators, then took that model when streaming came along and completely fractionalized it. So instead of delivering a singular consumer experience like you saw over here in Europe with something like Sky Go, you had somewhere close to 200 different what are called TV Everywhere services, where you had to go into each one of these things to try to find the program that you wanted. Streaming on demand, but you didn't know where the content was, and you had to go all over the place, and accessing it is, quite frankly, a bloody nightmare. All of that was a continuation of a progression of a model that started really centered on the consumer to deliver them more and more choice. But it got distorted by what was good for the businesses and became less about what was good for the consumer. Then effectively, streaming became mainstream. And the introduction of the SVOD services came along. And that pendulum that started really balanced and had been distorted way over here, where the price was just way out of whack with the consumer experience, swung all the way to the other side, where you basically had a perfect experience being delivered to consumers, where they could watch all of their shows from the first episode to the most current episode or last episode of a series, where they wanted to, when they wanted to, and how they wanted to. And they could do all that for about $10 a month. Now that previous model had gotten all the way up to about $100 a month. So you swing back over to the other side and you've got perfect utility for the consumer for $10 a month. Sounds fantastic, but there's $90 missing. That $90 missing didn't go to these new companies. The Netflixes and the Amazons and the Hulus in the world. They're only getting $10 a month for all of this fantastic utility and all this fantastic content. That $90 went to the consumer. So we went from a distorted model from a business perspective to a distorted model from the consumer perspective. And there's all sorts of economic distortions within that as well, which we can talk about when we do our conversation, Cade. And there are a lot of these services out there. But the question is, what comes next? Because that old model wasn't working for the consumer anymore, and this new model isn't working for businesses anymore. So really what we're seeing in the United States is two trends, because whenever you have a business that starts from the consumer perspective and gets distorted, and then gets disrupted, eventually things balance out. It's painful between point A and point B, and not everybody survives, but eventually things balance out. And particularly if they balance out from the consumer perspective, all these new services and new business models are created from the consumer on up, they're much more sustainable and much more valuable for everybody, which is what we think is going to happen. So the first thing that's happening is we see all that content that's been disaggregated in the United States coming back together into a whole bunch of different experiences that are much more aggregated. So at Fox in the United States, we've taken our 17 networks that we used to have, I guess as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, and we boiled those networks down to 5. So we have Fox, FX, National Geographic, Fox Sports, and Fox News. But you still had to go to all sorts of different places in order to be able to get that content, whether it was the TV Everywhere services, or some of our shows are on Netflix, some of our shows are on Hulu, some of our shows are on Amazon. It was just a nightmare if you wanted to watch a Fox show. So we're bringing all that content back together. That experience has been rolling out since April, I think, of this year, and finishes just before Christmas. And really what it's meant to be is a single home where consumers, if they want to watch any Fox show, they can go into there. It's built on a whole new streaming platform that's much more modern, which is maybe a conversation we can have another time. But the reality is what we're trying to do is marry the power of apps, which are incredible what they can deliver, but the power with a television experience. So we've leaned very heavily into full screen video. We've leaned very into simple navigation for the consumer to be able to find their shows or recommendations and machine learning capabilities so that we can actually present the content to them on a much easier basis. There's a boatload of benefits that come out of this, but the reality is we've got one place where we've got now all of the content across all of those networks that a consumer can go into and engage in much, much better. So Kate had asked me to do some demos, but because of a lot of different technical parts of the challenges of doing that, instead what I have is a video. So I'll try to talk over it, but for the most part, what I just wanted to show you is what this new experience is meant to look like for the end consumer, because it's driven very much from their perspective. So I'm going to run you a quick video. It shouldn't be more than about 90 seconds. So if you go into the service, you'll see we've got full motion video, full screen video, all throughout the UI. It's a collections-based navigation. So you can go down into programming and go across over content. So the first area is the Fox area, and that's where the Fox content is. As you go down through the programming, the video changes depending upon the program. You'll be able to watch the most current episode or any one of the past episodes of any show. You swipe on over and you get to FX and Nat Geo. But after that, everything becomes purely dynamic. So we're able to deliver all sorts of collections based off of what customers actually want to watch. Animation, comedy, drama, unscripted shows. We've got a lot of movies over on FX. Anywhere we have full seasons. And then our personal selection for you, which is your For You area. This is us driving down now through a collection and going into one of the show pages where you can actually see all the past episodes of the shows as well. This environment is built to be able to service not just current shows and full stack of the current shows, but also eventually past seasons and library content as well. We've also integrated live programming into here, so it's not just an on-demand environment anymore, because our channels obviously have a lot of live content, particularly the sports channels. So when you go into the live section, you can navigate to any one of the linear channels, but you don't have to watch the programming on a linear basis if you don't want to. Sport people will. But if you go into an on-demand piece of content, you can actually drop into the live stream, or you can go ahead and restart from the beginning of the program. We now have day, date, and time VOD capability built into the service. Of course, you've got normal search capabilities. They're fully integrated as well. And we can do that across all these networks. Every bit of this is dynamic. If you asked me to go ahead and create a new collection, I could go on the laptop right now and create another collection. Within 5 minutes, it would be nationally distributed to everybody. And that's basically the service. Okay? These lights are killing me here, guys. Okay, so re-aggregation of content we think is something that's going to be quite critical going forward. But if you think about that pendulum, it's going to swing a little further. So we've had a whole bunch of new services developed just over the last, I guess, 18 months or 2 years in the United States that are unfortunately called digital MVPDs. They're effectively streaming versions of cable and satellite services, aggregated content, bundled content, but on a much more consumer-driven perspective. The services are DirecTV Now. You're going to get me something to wipe my face. Sorry, guys. DirecTV has a service called DirecTV Now. YouTube has YouTube TV. Sony has a service called Sony View, Sling, which is actually owned by Dish, the satellite service. And there's a new service coming out from Philo, which is going to aggregate a whole bunch of other channels as well. But the one that Kate asked me to talk to you about is what Hulu's doing. And what Hulu's doing is taking their old SVOD service and building in live TV. Thank you very much. Excuse me. So they're building in live TV. What does that mean? Well, they've taken 60 channels which represent roughly 80% of all viewing in the United States. And they've integrated in those live channels through their service. Not just being able to watch them live, but being able to watch all of their content on those channels on an on-demand basis. So you have live channels, you have all of that content also available on demand, and then you have the depth of library that was already in the Hulu SVOD service, which has got literally thousands and thousands of shows. So you can marry up, go back to season 1, watch the first episode, and come all the way through to the most current episode of a show and actually watch it on the day that it airs if you want to on an on-demand basis. It's a rebalancing of the system because the prices of these services are closer to about $40 as opposed to $100, but they're not the $10 of the SVOD services that are out there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a video of that as well. Okay, so you're going to launch into the Hulu service here. You're going to see big screen experience just like we have on the new Fox service, except for not moving video, and that's because the depth of assets they have just requires too much bandwidth to be able to have full motion video. Top menu gives you all the capabilities you would expect. I'm going to go ahead and back over here to the left side and show you the home section to start with. So the lineup is your customized lineup based off of the preferences that you've already showed, your favoriting that you've showed, and what they've learned from all the data that's available to them about what you're actually interested in. If there's something live on like NFL football, you can go ahead and tune into the game whenever you want to. If you want to favorite a team, it'll automatically let you know when that team's playing. It'll give you the notifications in whichever environment you actually are interested in getting them. It reaggregates all of those programs into all sorts of different collections as well, and all of those collections are dynamic. So that NFL collection only shows up on NFL Sunday. It doesn't need to show up on other days. So the presentation of the content is constantly being adjusted automatically to be able to present you with what it thinks you want to watch. And Hulu's capability of being able to do that is pretty unique because they already have somewhere around 14 million customers, so they've got a great learning over what you actually wanted to watch to start with. The viewing experience nowadays on streaming, not just on demand, on live, is pretty much as good as you're finding on any of the cable or satellite services that are out there. But you can deliver them on a digital basis, so you can deliver a lot more dynamic functionality than you can in a set-top box where you have a 1 to 2 year development cycle. So the first mainstream that we're seeing in the United States in terms of a theme is the reaggregation of content. And the second major theme that we're seeing is a recreation of the bundle, not a total disaggregation that happened when we went over to TV everywhere, and then a totally distorted economic model that we saw with the original creation of SVOD. And that model's coming back now. These new digital MVPDs already have about 2.5 million customers in the United States in total across all of those services. They're growing pretty rapidly. A small fraction of them are actually keeping their traditional cable or satellite service and using these new services supplement. But a large portion of them are actually either replacing the cable or satellite service they had, or they're coming back into the bundle environment from what we refer to in the industry as, as cutters, shavers, or nevers. So that's kind of what we see happening in the industry, but the real issue or question is, what's that mean for all of us going forward? And that's what Kate wanted to talk about. And a big part of this is rights windows. So a lot of the reasons that consumers have such a bad experience right now is because of the way we used to deploy content. And those models are all changing in front of our eyes as well. And you're starting to see those in those new services. So I think I'll probably stop there because I think I won my bet with Kate that I could talk shortly. I think so.
I think you did. You're a minute shy.
And we'll go over to the question.
Thank you, Brian. That was great.
Sure.
Come and join me here and have a drink of water. Mop your brow.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Now they're turning the lights on here, so you're not going to get any relief.
Yeah, can we go into total darkness? Then maybe I'll survive.
It's interesting. You talk about sort of the death of the big bundle falling apart, of the big old bundle, and yet you say obviously we're reaggregating now and stuff like that. I think that's a good place to start because what's happened is everyone's going to take a hit from this, right? I mean, the fact that we've got the old big bundle falling apart because of the force of Netflix coming in and saying, hey, man, let's do it this way. Consumers went, wow. Who takes a hit? Who's the most in the crosshairs?
Well, there's a couple things in there. So everybody's taking a hit, but I think it's temporary. Timelines are relative and depends on who can survive longer in order to be able to get from that point A to point B. But I do firmly believe that models that are created from the consumer on up are much more sustainable in the long term. So we're actually quite positive and quite optimistic about what might happen. But I mean, some services aren't going to survive.
Yeah, I was going to say some of those channels aren't going to make it, or some services aren't going to make it.
Yeah, a lot of those services, a lot of those channels were created for a good reason at a point in time, and that reason doesn't really exist anymore, and that point of time is long past. So, Mikhail's over here. And I was talking to you earlier. I remember when we first launched digital at Sky in the UK, we went to all of our content partners and we wanted to provide more choice for them. And we ended up working with them to create extensions of all their channels. So we launched 7 different versions of Discovery and 7 different versions of MTV.
Right.
And it was a hugely powerful thing to do at the point in time. And it was
like,
great for the
wow,
consumer.
all this choice for the consumer, and they have all these different channels.
But you don't need those things anymore.
Right.
There's so much great content being created, and it's so easy to access now, or it's becoming easier to access now, that those models don't really have a reason to exist. So companies are having to figure out what their role is in the future. Ultimately, I think anybody, that's going to be a very, very generic statement, but anybody who is in the business of creating great content is going to be absolutely fine.
Well, they'll be fine if we can get the economics right for content.
Yeah, but the economics will be gotten right, because if they're not, well, what's the best way to put this? A $10 ecosystem can't support the creation of content that consumers have now become used to and absolutely love. So what's the alternative? We wake up 10 years from now and you have a choice of one particular supplier. You
maybe
have
Netflix?
Maybe Netflix, that's what they would like. You have a choice of content that's probably 1/10 of what you have right now. And you have pricing that is definitely not $10 a month. And in that world, a new model will find itself anyway, because the consumer will demand it. So yeah, I was going to say there's going to be a lot of pain, but actually there's a lot of pain that's already being seen by a lot of companies, because the old ecosystem is disappearing. That SVOD ecosystem that looked like it was incremental money surely is not. It is cannibalization or replacement money. And new models are having to be created, but they're being created. They're being created here, they're being created in Europe, they're being created everywhere else. And those companies that are in the content creation business and have the business models that can sustain them in that transition from A to B will be absolutely fine.
Right. So the bigger companies, probably the vertically integrated companies, so we're talking about,
I think so.
Fox Group is, 21st Century Fox.
Yeah.
The Time Warners that maybe become part of a telco soon. Disney. Yeah, those kind of companies. The smaller ones, say, I don't know, more niche channel type companies are going to find it harder, because there's going to be a period of pain here to figure this out.
I think that the smaller ones will have to find a new way of deploying the content they create. And there's going to be a bifurcation of what content actually stands out more than others. So that content that's passive viewing, that you can watch the same episode from 10 years ago as you can the most current episode, is going to have a harder time finding a new business model to make itself work, because the consumer doesn't need to see the next big show. The other half of that content, which is big episodic, big attention, continual storyline, we think is actually going to get more and more powerful over time.
Yeah.
And of course, sport and news.
Yeah, sport news.
Yeah.
If done right, and who knows who's going to own it, because we've got these big players coming in who say they want to snap up live sports rights. So
yes, they do.
That's also going to be a challenge. I mean, yesterday we had on this stage Dan Danker from Facebook, and obviously they pitched for the cricket. They didn't win it. Star, which is part of the Fox bigger group, the Sky group, did win it, but they did put a bid in, and they obviously have ambitions in that area. Amazon's moving into sport as well. So these are not, let's say, small issues.
No, and cricket's a unique one, because it's dominant in the markets in which it is relevant, and in other markets it has a very niche carry through, but it has a potential to reach large groups if it can get mass distributions. I assume that's what Facebook was thinking.
That's exactly what they're thinking.
It's also what Star was thinking, by the way.
Exactly, which is why they bid more money and got it.
So Star will not, Star got the global rights.
Yeah, got the global rights.
They're not just thinking India.
Right.
They're thinking much wider than that, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
Listen, from a sports perspective, the leagues care about distribution. We all like to think of the leagues as being money-grubbing enterprises that only want the biggest check possible. And I can tell you from dealing directly with them, that's not all they care about. They fully realize that if they take the biggest check possible and end up being seen by 1/10 of the audience that they did before, that their sport will die.
So what do you, I mean, this whole drop in NFL viewing and stuff, I mean, is that just an anomaly? Was that just because of the Trump election, or?
Well, if you're talking about what we saw last year, I think we'll have to see what happens over the course of the next 4 weeks.
Because people are concerned that live sports viewing is going down on live channels.
It's not. It's just being fractionalized into different places. There's way too many places. I think now, personally, and this is a personal opinion as opposed to a company position, there's way too many places that you have to go to in order to be able to follow your team. And there is a power in knowing if I want to watch my team, I go there. And the leagues have been experimenting, completely understandably so, but they've probably stretched it too far, and they've made it a little too much hard work for the consumer. Yeah,
it's a little bit like putting the NFL, some games on, what are they on now?
Yeah, think about the NFL. The NFL is on, in the United States, the NFL is on Fox. It is on, it's on Fox on Sundays. It is on CBS on Sundays and Thursdays, but that Thursday night game is, I actually think the Bundesliga from my old world, and I used to have fights with them about this, had it right, and I was wrong, in that they make it actually very specific where their games are played and what time they're played, so that their fans can always follow what's going on. And we enabled that.
Yeah, exactly.
We're the ones who sold our content there.
But now people are pulling out. Disney's pulled out. Will Fox pull out? I think Fox is.
We still sell some programs to Netflix.
Will you continue to do that?
I just do blanket deals like we used to. We used to do blanket deals with Netflix and Amazon. Hulu is a bit of a different beast because we own part of it. And the reality is the vast majority of their content, that content we're now looking on a case-by-case basis. So we put American Crime Story there, the OJ story, and the next show that's coming up, which is the Versace murder.
Murder, right.
Netflix has that. But that's because every one of those seasons is a completely unique storyline. Okay. And Netflix was willing to pay, quite frankly, a fortune for it.
Okay.
Where we have shows that have continual storylines, we're increasingly going to be holding those experiences back to ourselves, because actually we see one of the biggest problems what's happened over the last 10 years as a result of the way that we window content is the content's become disconnected from itself. It's too difficult for a consumer to be able to follow a show like they did with Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead from first season all the way through. And we need to bring all of that content back together based off of not business models, but consumer consumption. So we started that path about 2 years ago.
So when do you think all of Fox shows, other than, sort of?
Within the next year.
The next year.
Yeah.
So you'll be off Netflix pretty much entirely.
No, it's not about being off Netflix.
It's about
as a matter of fact, we just announced a show that one of our biggest creators, Ryan Murphy, who does American Crime Story, American Horror Story. Right. He did The Feud and does a whole bunch of other shows for us. He came to us with a show that we didn't think necessarily worked on a network, so we're actually producing it for him and selling it to Netflix.
Yeah, right.
So we'll work with all of these people, but increasingly more and more of the experiences will be where the content is connected either directly from us through TV Everywhere, or maybe in the future direct-to-consumer services, or through partners that'll deliver a complete experience like Hulu. And you're seeing all of the other big content companies do the exact same thing.
Right, right. Where is Fox now? I mean, you said it launched 6 months ago. I mean, what is your aspiration for that? What do you expect it to become? And does it basically, in the end, become your main vehicle to talking to consumers? Does it become a direct-to-consumer service? Because it isn't now.
No, it's not. Well, it depends how you define direct-to-consumer.
Okay.
I could make a case that TV Everywhere is direct-to-consumer. It's just they're paying somebody else, but they're consuming the content directly from our product. But listen, everybody's eventually going to have direct-to-consumer offerings in the marketplace. People have been trying to dance around this subject because they're worried about who they're going to offend or anything of that nature. But we're all going to find a new balance.
But it's not just offense; it's about money. I mean, the cable operators still give you the platforms still give you quite a bit of money for carriage.
Absolutely, but
so
the cable operators
take that away and go to direct.
But the cable operators are also programmers in the United States.
True.
Comcast owns NBCU. DirecTV is going to own Time Warner. Everybody is working in both sides of this equation now, and quite frankly, I think we all understand that we're going to have to find a new balance of delivering services to the consumer that makes sense and doing it with economics that actually make sense. So where's Fox Now for us? Fox Now is the reality is there's 90 million people in the United States that still have a traditional cable satellite bundle. And we're not going to just turn around and say, okay, to hell with you guys. We're just going to work on these new services going forward. So we thought we'd start with delivering the best consumer experience we could with our authenticated product. We can't fix this TV everywhere world because there's just too many operators doing too many different things. But we can at least fix it from our perspective.
You can offer them your Fox.
We can deliver an aggregated experience that feels like television, that excites people. We've already seen uplifts in usage of over 100% on some of the platforms that we've deployed on.
100%?
Yeah, about 108%.
Of your channels when they're in this nice new...
Of our programs and from those channels when they're in this new aggregated
nice new shiny aggregation. Okay,
which is just very simply,
That's huge.
It's easier to use, it feels like television, and there's more programs in there because it's now across all of our channels. But the reality is, it's really meant as a positioning for anything or everything we're going to want to do in the future. So the technology is all the newest versions. We were one of the first people to do the authenticated services 8 years ago, but what we had was pretty old and inflexible. This new system is completely flexible, and we can drive it from the consumer perspective. It gives us much better data on what consumers want to consume and how they're going to consume. If we eventually go into direct-to-consumer services, clearly that data gets much stronger for us. We're able to deliver targeted advertising experience or even ad-free experiences should we choose to do so.
That was my next question, was about the ad load and advertising experience in direct-to-consumer and OTT. I mean, how does that change? Because there's been a lot of talk.
It definitely changes. So,
like Hulu, you've got an experience with Hulu because
Hulu has both.
It was ad-supported.
It has ad-supported and ad-free options. Netflix is obviously ad-free. Amazon is ad-free. We actually think Hulu has a unique position in the marketplace because it does have that dual revenue stream option. And everything we've seen from talking to consumers, and we've done a lot of it, says that about half the market wants an ad-free experience, and they're willing to pay a good amount of money for an ad-free experience. Yep. And the other half of the market...
They pay like $5 more?
At Hulu, they pay $5 more. That's exactly right. But the other half of the market actually just wants the best price they possibly can, and they're happy to have an ad experience. But they don't want the old-fashioned linear ad experience. They want reduced ads. They want ads that give them information that's more relevant to them, which you can do with digital ad insertion. So we're reducing ad loads. By doing that, we're getting better consumption, which allows us to charge better CPMs, and therefore be able to retain or even grow revenue from that side of the business. It
kind of reminds me of what you learned in Europe, and maybe this is a way to segue into that, because you had a big experience in Europe, and the European market's quite a different market. One of the things that I think about is measurement and data and how you use that, right? Something I remember at Sky, I mean, they still do it now. They have a huge sort of data collection business that goes on. Is all that part of the new Fox? In other words, how you figure out how people are consuming, how you figure out the ad load?
Yeah, it's not just Fox, it's everybody. I'd love to say that it's just us and that we're on the cutting edge of it. I think we're on the front edge of it, but everybody's trying to do it now. It's always been, because the US market has been very much a wholesaler-retailer bifurcated market, the content creators had very little information about how customers were consuming their content. Once you're in a digital world, you don't automatically get that, but the potential is there. It really depends on whether the platform that you're working through is going to share that data with you, and some platforms share more with you than others.
Let me see. Google probably doesn't. Facebook doesn't really do that, although they do. But
Facebook's actually pretty good about it. Okay. But if you're providing your service directly to the consumer, either through TV Everywhere or through direct subscription or ad-supported, then you can get, with the consumer's consent, a pretty unlimited amount of data. And that's in some cases as valuable as direct subscription revenue for what you think your future business is going to be. Yep. I think we're still very much in the early days of being able to utilize that in an intelligent fashion. The big Silicon Valley companies are far ahead of the broadcast industry or the content industry in not just collecting data, but understanding how to utilize it. But those kind of things are pretty ubiquitous, so it's quite easy to catch up once you can unlock that.
Which is a nice segue into sort of, I guess, how you see the big guys, when you look at Facebook Watch, which was launched yesterday, or he talked about it yesterday, it's been up for a couple of weeks, this idea that this is going to be the place where people watch video. How do you feel about that? And is that something that Fox would, just say, okay, fine, we'll put our video on Facebook? Or do you think that that's going to be a big competitor to what this reaggregation and bundling?
If we thought we could monetize to the level that we need to monetize to create the content that customers want, then yeah, we might. But I don't think we'll be able to. I think the reality is the consumption of video content in the social world is much shorter and much less monetizable than it is in the old distribution model, the new digital distribution models. And it doesn't work very well for long form, and I guess we'll see whether it'll work well for sport. But Twitter didn't have a great experience last year with the NFL. No. There's a reason they don't have it this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all still learning how to be able to not just work alongside, but to be able to leverage the opportunities out of social. But I think we're highly skeptical about the concept that long-form video consumption is going to migrate to social platforms in any significant way, because that's just not really why people are there in the first place. They're not there to watch their programs. They're there to communicate with people on a one-to-one basis. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if I think long-form video on Facebook. I think that's a wait and see. Let's see what happens.
I think the average view time of most videos on Facebook is around 3 seconds.
3 seconds.
Yeah, our programs are a little longer than that.
You're a little longer than 3 seconds. Okay.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure they'll work.
A little bit on future tech, and then I'm going to open up to the audience for some questions. There's been, this innovation is going crazy now. Everything happens so quickly. It all goes on. Can you talk a little bit about sort of push out a little bit, sort of AI, VR, what's happening with voice recognition? What are the things that you think are popping right now?
I'm not sure I'm a good person to ask that, because I'm the person that really, really, really supported 3D at Sky.
Oh, really?
And that didn't go particularly well.
Right. Let's make a note.
There's some other things that I was a big proponent of during my time at Sky that didn't necessarily make prime time, although I've been lucky to be involved with some of the bigger things as well. So let's just rattle them off. 4K, which has been a stalled promise of a better viewing experience for about a decade now, actually feels like it's coming. It's not going to be revolutionary like HD was, as we talked about earlier, because HD happened at the same time as the transition to flat screens. But consumers do care about the quality of their viewing experience. Yep. Probably based off of what we're seeing, a little less than they used to, because the viewing experience gotten so good that actually improvements are more incremental now than revolutionary. But the big problem with 4K has been the cart before the horse. Create the technology, there's no content. Oh, if there's no content, I'm not going to create the technology. But now with Apple's announcement the other day, and Amazon's been supporting, and Roku both been supporting 4K for a couple of years, I see the content side of the conversations now starting to shift pretty dramatically towards actually let's invest in creating the content in 4K. Over at Fox Sports, we're already working on a number of different projects to be able to bring 4K into the regular work stream. Okay. Our guys over at FX have been producing their content, even though they're not distributing it in 4K, but they've been producing it in 4K for a little while, and they're building up a nice library. Good. So it feels like that one's coming.
VR?
VR, we're a big investor in VR. I don't think any of us know where it's going to go from a mass consumer marketplace. There's part of me that wants to get super excited about it, probably more from an augmented perspective as opposed to a pure glasses perspective, but there's also part of me that feels totally burnt by 3D, so I don't want to go out there on a limb.
How about...
Go ahead. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, whichever way you want to talk about it, that's just about delivering the consumer what they want to watch without them having to search for it.
Exactly.
And quite frankly, there is so much content created now, discovery is actually becoming a big problem. A big part of that, as we talked about earlier, is because we window the content so badly that it's just hard for people to get all of the content in one place. And when I say all the content, I don't mean every program that's ever made, I just mean every episode of a current show. But that's being solved.
What I worry about is I say, Alexa, find me Game of Thrones.
Did you see South Park last night? What happened with South Park last night?
I didn't. What happened with South Park?
So South Park did an episode last night in the United States where Matt Stone and the guys intentionally put a whole bunch of Alexa references into the show. So if you happen to have an Alexa in your room, it started reacting to the show. and they started putting things on people's shopping lists that I can't say on the stage here. I love content creators. It's just absolutely hysterical. We were talking about this upstairs. I've learned a ton, both first in the UK and then in Germany and in the US. But I was trying to boil it down to 3 things. And what I learned most in the UK, which is really what the theme of this was meant to be, was if you build a business from the consumer on up, it's eminently sustainable. And Sky is a perfect example of that in the UK. It was always the challenger, and therefore it was always innovating. It was always doing whatever it needed to do to deliver a better experience for the customer. People never thought it was going to succeed, and it did. It did. What I learned when I went to Germany is if you haven't sorted out your legal and finance side of your business model, that actually it doesn't matter how consumer-focused you are, you don't stand a chance. And I actually think that's relevant when you think about players like Netflix and others that right now are building their businesses off of either debt raising or shareholder spend, but without sustainable business models. Eventually, you need a sustainable business model. Right. Because remember, Sky in Germany existed for 20 years before we got there, and never was able to get through that success. So UK, build it from the consumer on up, you succeed. Germany, you actually need a business model that works eventually. You can last a long time on the hope of investors, but eventually you need a business model that actually makes sense. And then the thing I learned probably the most coming back to the US, because I've been gone so long, is that making content is far more complicated than anybody who's not directly involved with it understands, particularly at scale and quality that is being created these days. And it's not just complicated because of the difficulty of creating good programs. It's complicated because of how many people are involved in that creation process. It's not just the studios. It's the original show idea creator. It's the showrunner. It's the agents for the actors and for those showrunners and the directors. They all have not just an emotional stake in the creation of that content, they have a business stake in the creation of that content. And they have built their careers off of these same models that got distorted over time. Yeah. And whatever new model replaces it has to take into consideration bringing them along. Because if you don't, there's nothing for consumers to watch, and there's nothing for businesses to sell. Yeah. And I don't think Europe understands that as well as the US, whereas I think Europe understands the consumer much better than the US, to give you kind of 2 dynamics.
That's interesting.
The creation of content at the volumes and quality that we're talking about
you have to
is super
the
complicated.
Writers, the showrunners, all those people.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah. I'm going to take one question from the floor. No, I'm told I can't do that. No? Yes? One question. Who has a question?
Mikhail.
Mikhail, yeah. Just yell it, I'll repeat it.
Brian, if there is going to be this
there we go.
Super aggregator of content in 10 years' time, do you think it's possible that it is actually one of the existing players, or is everybody so entrenched in their own space that a new completely new party would emerge to become the super aggregator of all these services?
I can't look at you without smiling, though. I think the last time I saw you, your hair was in the middle of your back.
He was younger then.
Yeah, still good looking, though. There's going to be multiple aggregators. There's just no doubt about it. But I think there'll be more and more on a global basis with localization that adapts to it. So I don't think you're going to see Fox or Disney or Universal disappear. I think they're actually going to be eminently successful in the future because ultimately they're content companies, they're IP companies, and they're really good at it. I'm not sure we're going to wake up despite Apple's announcing $1 billion spend on content or Facebook doing what they're doing or Google doing what they're doing. I'm not sure in 10 years we're going to wake up and find that actually you're watching the next Breaking Bad having been created by them. They're going to try, and they might hit a few out of the park. But I don't see them becoming the next big content creators. I think they're going to find ways, and the studios are going to find ways of creating business models that work for the 2 of them together. Right now, they're struggling with that, but I do believe that they will.
This is the Apples, the Facebooks.
Yeah. Will Amazon? A new player come in as an aggregator? I think whoever the winners are, if there are winners in 10 years' time, they're amongst the players we already know, but they'll be very different businesses than they are today.
Amazon?
Amazon is the company that I don't like talking about because I've got no answers.
It's big.
I don't understand Amazon. They have such a different business model than everybody else. I think they're going to be the world's first global government someday. and we will all be doing whatever Jeff Bezos asks us to do.
Yeah, that's kind of scary. Well, on that note, listen, we have to wind up because we have another session coming. But I think this has been really illuminating, and please join me in thanking Brian Sullivan.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could head out, please, so we could set up for the next session very quickly. Thank you very much.